All right. EOF Implementers call on 6th March 2024. I guess the first thing we start off with is client updates. For Besu, we have Exchange and Create 4 to do. I've been focusing on making sure it passes the reference tests that have been published before I move on to implementing more features. The big reference test we got done was stack validation. That one took a bit of work because I had to rewrite the entire stack validation section, but it passed all the ones in the PR that I saw at the time. Still need to put together a full collection of all the other, get them all merged so we can make sure that the basic can run them, get a master omnibus set. I also added a pretty printing function to our EVM tool. I don't know if we want to, once we get the spec nailed down, if we want to standardize a standard pretty printing format that can be consumed. It's similar to what's seen in some of the reference tests. I can make it conform to that, but if as an implementation guide, if you get into something you don't understand, pretty print the EOF and you'll be able to see what's really going on rather than having to hand decode it. So that's something that took a couple hours for me to write, but it's paid off in dividends and speeding up some of the fixes. Next on my list is Dragon. Anything from Reth to report or REVM to report?
Yeah, I am in full swing in implementation. I did like first iteration of the simpler opcodes, the static jumps, functions, jump path, data section, swap, and basically those things. The thing that I'm currently working on is EOF create, DX create. I probably finish that in a few days, and after that, I still need to do calls and validation. I still didn't like start the validation, but yeah, progressing.
Cool. Good to hear. Hugo's next, so I guess that means EVM1 is next. Whoever wants to speak for EVM1.
Yeah, no major updates from us. We're still working on the calls implementation, I think, and Xcode logic for legacy and adding more tests for TX create. We've renamed Create 3 and Create 4 in implementation and in the tests. And yeah, mostly working on adding more tests and exporting them for others to consume too. Minor change in the TX create implementation was moving the validation point where validation of unit call happens a bit later after we charge for hashing. Before it was between charging for hashing and EIP 3860 charge. Now we moved it after all gas checks. Now we do the validation. Like it seemed this way that it's like slightly fewer chance of DOS-like scenarios this way. So first we do all the checks, then do this linear pass to do the validation. Yeah, and like this, here's the link to corresponding change in the spec, which is like two lines change. Yeah, I think that's all.
Cool. Three things I'll bring up after the go around: create renaming, the call renaming, and the call return. I think there were some discussions on various discords over the week on that. Just want to finalize on that. But let's table that. Charles is next on my list. Anything from Viper?
No, I think there might be some spec things that are waiting on me, but I'm not sure. So if anybody's waiting on me for something, just ping me again.
Okay. Unrelated to EOF, I'd be interested to hear just how much of an impact T-Store would have on reentrancy, but we can table that for the end.
Quite a lot. We could enable it for all contracts, especially with the pricing changes that I've been proposing.
Okay. Cyrus, are you representing a team?
No, I'm just here out of curiosity.
Cool. And Peter's with EVM1, so that's everyone on my screen. Okay, so I guess we have the open discussion on spec issues. We have create, rename, call return on the list. Anything else people want to bring up? Charles, you said you had some spec items?
I said things might have fallen off my plate in terms of spec items,
Okay.
so I'm actually depending on other people to bug
Okay.
me if they're waiting on me.
Cool. Peter has a hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to discuss the call stack depth check in create and call and the new calls, which is kind of we ping pong the spec back and forth. So I think we should
Okay.
stabilize it, and also the EIP 663, which is the exchange one, which is waiting on approval from Alex. And Alex had some concerns, so we either clarify the concerns maybe, or if no concerns, then we should approve this PR and finalize this as well.
Okay. Exchange seems the most important from this list. So let's start there. Let's just do this list in reverse order. What was Alex's concerns?
Yeah, I think Alex, can you speak to that? Was that there's 3 options in one EAP?
Type to that if your voice can't handle it.
You typed, we'll go through this today. Keep forgetting, but are there concerns, or do you just want to go through it and approve? Okay.
Okay. So it doesn't appear like there's any changes that need to be done to exchange. So hopefully that'll get merged soon. Call stack depth. You wanted to discuss that. I think that's another discussion I forgot about us having. You want to outline it for us?
Yeah, so I don't have full background, but I think there was intention to remove this check and have it have the 63 rule we effectively limit the stack depth in the new calls. And also, I think we were not fully clear on whether this call stack depth would remain in in EOF create or TX create. And then I think at one point we did change to bring the call stack depth back in the new calls, because EOF create and TX create had it at that point. And now we're kind of making the move in the opposite direction. And so I think the arguments to remove it are that the 63 rule, which is now obligatory, limits the call stack depth effectively to it depends on the gas limit, but Andre did this napkin math, I guess, and there was 22 billion gas, so that's quite a lot. And
my calculation is 785 billion gas. If it's 65/64, it's raised to 1024 times 100, which I think is the call number for warm. So it's still a large number, but still quasi reasonable.
Yeah, that's so this number not being insanely large is one argument to keep the call stack depth. The other one that I think I don't know if it's valid, is just to touch legacy behavior as little as possible. And since calls, new and old calls can be intertwined, then it in some way, this tangentially touches or crosses the legacy behavior. And also what I think you, Dan, also brought up is that, I mean, yeah, the cost of that is just a hard limit that we don't need to think about too much to say that we don't let the cold stack depth become very large due to some weird gaming of the gas behavior. So it's just a hard cap, which is easy to reason about, and it's maybe good to have as a fuse box mechanism.
Yeah. I'm in favor of keeping the call depth. I think for one of the reasons you mentioned is Besu does use a lot of the same code for call and for AXT call for EOF. And that would make it easier because all we're changing is what we pull off the stack and what we return in our situations when we fail. So we're trying to reuse as much data as possible. And another thing I mentioned is layer twos could do crazy things with their gas schedules, and they could, make instead of 100, they can make calls 1. But even if they don't make 100, 785 billion is still reasonable because it fits in a 4-byte signed integer. So that is something that I could see some people wanting to use because they have the space for. So yeah, it's unreasonable by mainnet standards, but not unreasonable by implementation. And I think Geth's burnt pixels actually use that much gas for some of its generation for their benchmark. So I think there's still value. We can't rely completely on the 63/64ths to provide a cap that won't be reached by 1024. And I think we still need a cap. I don't know.
Another example are tooling that do some fuzzing, something like that. They're like have very, very high gas limit, they want to fuzz a lot. And having like gas depth limit matters to them, for example.
Okay. Any other discussion about keeping or losing the limit?
Yeah, to me also feels safer, I guess, to keep it for both calls and creates. But an extra question then is whether we want an special status code for calls which failed because of this limit. This is what Peter suggested in the PR, and because this failure is different from others because like execution didn't start and gas was not consumed for execution, so it's like a light failure of the call.
Right.
I tend to think that we don't need this extra status code, but I'm not sure.
Which one would you use instead?
Regular failure, because it's not a revert, but just a failure.
However, for a regular failure, there would be all gas consumed, meaning, I mean, the caller could reasonably decide whether to continue or not based on that piece of information, because if that's a hard failure, then the caller only has what 5,000 or the 1/64 of gas left, and when that was the light failure, then they have pretty much all the gas that they send there initially. So there might be this decision point to be made, to be kept or I don't know, exposed in this API. Also, just to make it complete, there's also the second light failure scenario, which is not having enough balance for the value sent. So it's not only about the cold stack depth. Then what do you think?
Yeah, I guess
I'm trying to read the
sense.
yellow paper to see what call and create do on call limit reached.
Oh, that's the new creates have different stack return because they return the address on success and 0 on failure, so they kind of a different case.
Yeah.
Whereas the new calls will return 0 on success and 1 on revert, 2 on the hard failure, and the light failure either goes to, well, it can also go to 1 because the gas implications are the same. At least that would that would dispel one concerns, but one means that the frame, I mean the execution frame began, which is not the case with the light failure.
For what it's worth, I don't have a strong opinion on this, but from the compiler perspective, we wouldn't generally care unless people started asking for it, and I think it's a fairly niche case to check whether an exceptional halt is an exceptional halt. I mean, right now we don't even distinguish between revert and exceptional halt. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, it's okay either way.
Yeah, from what I read from the yellow paper, it's treated the same as if there's insufficient funds passed in. So that would be a light failure, I think.
Hold on about the Viper's story. There is no distinction right now between the hard and
Right.
revert and failure because it's just always zero.
Yeah, I'm saying we
Well,
wouldn't really care.
You wouldn't if you had the opportunity. Okay.
And yeah, I mean, we might care about revert versus exceptional failure, but distinguish them further is not really. I mean, usually you just bubble it up or try to bail out with some.
Okay, but
yeah,
like gut feel, which one would you put the light failures in? Which category?
Revert doesn't take all gas, whereas exceptional halts do. So I
Right.
think light failures would go in the same category as reverts.
And like the distinction between the Collie frame have begun or not is not really that important.
I don't know. To me, it seems to very different situation. One, like the cold code reverted somehow, and so signals to you that there was some assertion failure. And when it didn't start it at all, it's like different for a caller.
yeah.
Well,
Actually,
yeah,
that's a good point.
Mhm.
Like, we don't really care actually how much gas the contract used, but whether it was a system failure or user failure, user generated failure.
Right. But
could
but the
just-
light failure one is fuzzy on that because the insufficient balance can be the user fault.
That's a user failure.
Yeah, what they cold stack depth failure is more a system failure. So it's a mixed
Yeah, new
bag.
flag, like new tree.
Yeah, I mean we're discussing whether or not to add it.
Would matter a lot, but if we have distinction between the failure that could happen, we should return proper like number that's going to flag that.
So if we put a case for this in the spec, we're going to have to write a reference test for it too. So keep that in mind.
By the way, I don't really understand why we have failure, light failure for the call stack depth being 1024. That seems like an exceptional failure.
It always has been like that, I think. Someone correct me.
So consume all gas.
So that would be a change from legacy calls. Might make sense, but
Well, let's do legacy calls too.
I think
They're exceptional failures, right?
let me look this up just to be extra sure. So all the legacy calls, so they return 0, but they do not. Hold on. They do not consume all gas. In the balance case and also in the call stack depth case, they are light failures. At least in the EVM1 implementation. I don't know if that's reference, no.
course.
And create.
Oh,
Create is
there's
a light
the
failure as
fine
well.
print
Yes.
in the. Jeez. What? Why? Um,
By which part? What?
why don't we treat call depth limit as an exceptional failure?
No idea. Where
It's
are you
different.
looking
It
for?
doesn't spend. It doesn't spend all gas. That's the difference from revert, or in this case, exception.
Why is it treated differently from like a call from like a stack overflow?
Underflow, yeah, I don't.
And maybe it's implementation detail.
Well, the caller can continue after this, unlike this data stack overflow.
The caller can continue.
Oh, I see.
But
What you're
they
saying. It's
have-
the caller's fault, not the collie's fault.
Fine.
I see.
Yeah, they can continue, but they have barely any gas left.
But gas is not consumed for.
Andre, you're saying that it's the caller's fault, right? For these two
But
cases.
for operand stack overflow, underflow.
No, for call depth limit.
Right. Okay. Sorry, I misheard.
So that's how it's different from stack overflow.
So you don't even enter the call one context. Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, no, we don't. Probably that's the reason, you know.
The reference
Although-
test on like static call depth isn't very helpful, but they do set the gas limit to an absurdly high, to a ridiculous but not unreasonable 892 billion gas. So this is testable.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even actually know why. I mean, if it's the caller's fault, then you shouldn't even get a return code. You should just exceptionally halt. That's my opinion.
Okay, but now, given that the old create and old calls have the light failure, do you want to change this for the new instructions?
I guess I can see the value of having the extra return code. Because it
In
should
case
basically not happen, right? Like if you're trying to make the call and you're at the end of the call stack and you can't make the call, then all you can do is clean up. All you would want to do is clean up, sorry.
Wait, you would like to have the new return code but consume all gas for call?
No, I'm agreeing with you. Just have the light failure. I mean, the only reason you would want to do this, I think, is if you're trying to introspect the EVM state, which I don't know if that's really a good thing, but you can imagine like a script which is like do something different if you're at the end of the call stack. Some transactions were like maybe some of these like pathological transactions where you're trying to like consume as much gas as possible. You can do something different depending on if you're at the end of the call stack or not. But like for most user applications, regular applications, you wouldn't really care.
Right.
And kind of the same thing with the send value thing. Like normally if you try to send value and you don't actually have the value to send, it's like an error. I don't know why. I can't really think of a case where you would want to catch that, you know.
I don't know. I mean, just it it always works like this.
I think it's more important that it's well defined, that it makes sense because it's such an edge case. We also want to make sure that we don't create an exploit, but I'm not seeing how we could do that unless we deliberately cause problems. I don't know.
I mean, the conservative thing is always just like preserve semantics, right? And I think it's
Right.
kind of fun.
The most I guess the most in line with the old ones would be to use the revert return code and not consume all gas. But I guess that's the least divergent.
Yeah.
And we just do not like using the language you used, do not let the caller introspect the state of the EVM that led to the return code 1. So it might be either a revert in the frame, in the caller frame, the callee frame, or a insufficient balance or a call stack depth case. And this is equivalent to the old calls returning 0. So that's like the if we try kind of apply this rule, then I guess this would be the outcome.
Okay. Unless we find problems with it, let's just go ahead with that rule then.
Okay, I can spell it out on the channel so we can read it and see how it sounds in writing.
Okay. Next on the list, we kind of touched on this call returns, and I just want to make sure from a user experience perspective that this won't be a problem. For the EXT calls, we're flipping where, 0 is failure, 1 is success. 0 is success, and the higher numbers are different forms of failure. In Solidity, there is a low-level call, delegate call, and static call function. It returns a tuple. One of them is a Boolean. My concern is if we flip the EOF switch, do we want it to either fail or have Solidity mask it? And if so, would they provide an EXT call that would preserve the value as an enum? And since we got Charles on the call, it'd be worth asking, does Viper have a similar low-level call function? Would you map it, or does it impact the users? How would that work?
That's interesting, actually. I didn't think about so we have raw call. And
Yeah.
interestingly, actually, we're adding a keyword to Viper, which syntactically differentiates between external and internal calls.
Okay.
And the name of the keyword is confusingly actually EXT call, which I think was a coincidence, but maybe on one of these calls, Peter said it or I said it, and then it buried in everybody's subconscious, and then it manifested in both implementations. But anyways, so I'm wondering, first of all, if that might be a point of confusion. But
Yes. Yes, that's next on the agenda. That's the point I want to make. So let's focus on the values, then we'll focus on the name next.
From the point of view of compiler generated call instructions, we prefer 0 as success because it reduces an instruction.
Right. So if you saw you were running in EOF mode and they had the low level call instruction, would you be able to flip it for them, turn it into a Boolean off the result?
We would probably change the API
Okay.
so
So you
that
would
if
make
we're
them change
running
it if it's, go ahead.
yeah, if we're running in EOF mode, well, I need to think through this actually, but one thing is like if we're running in EOF mode, you like reverse the argument of the return values so that they're forced to rewrite the code. But yeah, it could be an issue. I can also check how often people actually check the return value. People usually don't do it unless they, except for these ERC20 transfer things, where a bunch of tokens are like non-compliant and they don't return true or false. They express it in the error condition. I have to think about it. Alex?
Yeah, Solidity it would be it would be fine because the variables in the tuple are typed. So if it's currently a Boolean, this would change into like an enum or a number. So users would need to change the use cases. I think at this point, users directly don't really use the low-level calls, but all the bigger libraries do. So something like Soulmate, that's this other one, Soul Lady. Yeah, I think these heavily rely on the on the X call because they don't want to have anything done by the compiler. But in many cases, they also just use inline assembly directly. Yeah, this is a good point. Basically, these libraries would need an EOF version, which may be a problem.
So
Yeah, and
if
I
they
think,
use this, go ahead.
sorry, I think even if the signatures are changed, it's still very error prone because people are gonna have to go through and look for these low level call things and then update it. And it's usually called like success comma result equals raw call or something, right? And if you don't rename that variable to like is failure comma, so you have to like rename the variable and then change the check to. I mean, I think that seems kind of error prone, but doable. But
Yeah, I think
So,
maybe
ahead.
the more important outcome of this is that maybe Solidity should have some kind of a meta variable to show if you're in EOF mode. And there were some ideas to even expose like the EVM version to the contracts during compilation, but maybe EOF would make sense. The other option is if the low-level call is just called differently, like X call, then it wouldn't compile. But yeah, I think we probably have to have like a discussion with Daniel, a proper discussion with Daniel about this.
Yeah. My thought is if you're doing assembly, YOLO, you're on your own. But what Solidity and Viper could do is they could keep the original call, and depending upon whether you're in EOF or normal mode, if you're in normal mode, you keep doing what you're doing. If you're in EOF mode, you just do a not on the value and you still get your Boolean there. But we introduce also an X call that will preserve the enum as a number, and then that will fail in non-EOF mode. So you still have portable code that behaves like you might expect it. And if you really care about what the return value was, you would use Xcode. But maybe that's a bad idea. I see Alex's hand went right up. So
Yeah, my concern is really the libraries. So it has been painful with Open Zeppelin. So one example, I mean, it's not a problem of Open Zeppelin per se, but this has been a problem for like 2 years back, like 3-4 years ago, that a lot of the projects at the time depended on the Open Zeppelin libraries, and Open Zeppelin was not in a position or not willing to update to Solidity 0.5 for a longer period of time. So they maintained the libraries on 0.4. And this meant that basically a lot of the ecosystem was still stuck with 0.4. when the Solidity team was working like a year on 0.5. And the same problem could occur, with the new calls, because basically all the libraries would need to be changed to be EOF compatible. And that's just a question, how to handle it. So maybe the right way to do this is to invite maybe Soulmate, Solidity, or Open Zeppelin, or all of them to the call and go through some of the possible solutions.
I agree with Dano. I think the most sane thing to do here is just, raw call is not actually that low level. So the most same thing to do is just to flip the error condition if you're in if we're emitting call 2 or EXT call now, and then there can, but the raw call is configurable, so you can add a flag to the signature, which is like use EOF enum, and if you do that, then you get the raw error code or the raw return code.
Yeah, because
Everything is
Python
fine.
can do variadic return types based on inputs. I'm not sure Solidity can.
We don't not in Viper you can't do that in general, but for built-ins we can bypass the type system, so we can do whatever we want.
And also the question is what is the main reason to use the low level calls, if that is, for example, to have control over the gas parameter or the output buffer. That's not present in the new calls anymore.
It used to be
Maybe.
used. Sorry, was that a question, Peter?
Like I thought, if by removing the output buffer and gas parameters, we are removing the use case or the main use case for low level call, maybe there's no problem.
So people, to some extent, people use the low level call, but I think more frequently they use inline assembly. And the reason is they do this in certain highly optimized cases for like ERC20 transfers and e-transfer. Even the signature verification, calling the precompile. People tend to do this in inline assembly and not relying on Solidity itself, because the measurements show that it's much more efficient if they do it in assembly. Whatever the reason may be, the case is that most of these popular libraries use inline assembly for the calls, and which means that they will need to have an EOF version, which may be a barrier for adoption. So I think that's a key point to maybe discuss and bring some of these people on the call.
Yeah. I mean, because
Something
jumps,
else.
if your assembly does a jump, guess what? You got to rewrite it.
Something
I mean,
that I just thought of.
they're still structured UL, so they don't have jumps or anything like that, but they do have calls and
Yeah.
static calls.
Charles, you were saying?
Yeah, something that I just thought of, which is related to, which is not the return code, but the return data buffer, which is exactly if we don't fill in the output buffer, then users need to load from return data, and that, like right now, Viper doesn't expose the return data buffer to users, but we might want to. In EXT call world, and it might be kind of user unfriendly with the exceptional halting for out of bounds, which I don't actually know what the current status of that is.
Okay. So not much can be made on this till we get Solidity on the call. So let's see if we can try and get them in 2 weeks. Solidity. Next to last on my list, actually 2 things, is the renames. I don't think the create renames are too controversial. I already did the changes in Besu. But the call ones, especially with the external keyword, That does make me wonder if we should open the door again on the call rename and come up with a different, like maybe just the letter X instead of the XT. I don't know.
From my side, I would really like to have S and D at the start or at the end of the name, because when it's in middle, it's very hard to basically to read it. Other than that, change seemed better than what was previously. Yeah, maybe
So EXT calls out,
out.
ecstatic call, S EXT call. Yeah. I thought we wanted S and D first. E call, SE call, DE call.
I think the reading issue is not as big if it's one letter.
Yeah, I like that.
S. Yeah, because they're all part of the same series.
E call, S call, and ed call. But do you want to
Yeah.
spell delegate out every time?
Can you elaborate on the issue with the ext prefix, because it has precedent with ext code hash?
So for one, there's the external modifier in Solidity. And if you're doing an ext call, it's necessarily an external call. Even if it is to yourself, even if it's an internal, it's a call. But Charles said he was adding the external keyword. I mean, maybe we stick with external and it's not too bad. I don't know. Just that's one thing that crossed my mind as Charles was mentioning what Viper commands were.
But even if you
I-
target yourself, it becomes an external call. So it creates a new frame.
Right, if it does an actual frame call and it doesn't just inline it as a jump.
You mean in Solidity?
In Solidity, like an internal call won't always be external. Even though it looks like a function in the call, you could just jump to it. But if you're using ext call, it'll always be an external call, so it lines up there. It still lines up, I mean. Maybe we should just stick with ext.
I like what Charles proposed.
E, S, and ed.
Yeah. But I don't have any strong opinion on that, to be honest.
Yeah, but where do you have ext call in Solidity?
I
Ext
think-
for external, we don't right now. Go ahead.
You meant external, like info.
Right.
Not ext, but external was a keyword.
But ext stands for external, so but it ultimately has the same semantics, so it's not too much of a problem there.
I don't have anything against the ones that Charles posted. Just wanna.
It looks like Charles is using the word await as well, so I don't think there'll be the name collision.
No, there was a lot of bench bike shedding over the name, and now we've settled on ext call. I'm
Sorry?
okay. I'm okay with the short names because it's assembly, and mnemonics are usually short.
So I'm personally not a fan of having delegate call and static call, but it is what it is. What I care more about is being consistent. And even if you look at the exchange instruction that wasn't shortened, so I think generally the EVM doesn't really use shorthands, with the exception of like the store and loads, right? So it's not really fully consistent, but I mean, I think that's why I'm leaning towards the non-extremely shortened versions.
ext call, exts call, extd call.
I mean, I would rather just
EXT
Right outside
static,
the
EXT
colon.
delegate.
Yeah.
That's my favorite version too.
I mean, it's
like
more mental
more-
load, with the shorthand.
Okay. EXT full length. EXT static, EXT delegate, and EXT. Okay. That's enough bike shedding, I guess, for the day then. Yeah, anything else people want to discuss? We got 10 minutes left. We don't have to go the full distance.
So under the version that Andre posted is what we take out of this call, right?
Yes.
Okay. I can make a PR to the EOF Megaspec and advertise it on EVM channel again and see about the
Okay,
feedback.
Charles?
Charles?
If we're discussing other things, I want to see if we can revisit the return data copy.
Return data
out of
copy.
bounds.
Okay, what's your concern? Go ahead and start.
Oh, it's just what we were discussing earlier, which is if the users are accessing the return data buffer directly, it's going to be kind of confusing because it behaves differently and it's not very user friendly. We can work around it, which is if somebody does raw call, then we do the copy from the return data buffer for them. But yeah, from a UX perspective, if we want to give access to the return data buffer correctly or directly, then it's not. Yeah, it's just not very user friendly. Like the compiler can deal with it, but I worry about users more.
I don't have any strong opinions on it. Epsilon team have any comments? Is there a proposal for change or it's just a notation that it's user unfriendly sufficient?
Well, the change would be to make it consistent with the other copy instructions. Does anybody know why the current return data copy has the out of bounds behavior, or was it just like maybe kind of an oversight that the spec diverged from the other copy instructions?
You mean the current one, the proposed one, or the live one?
The live one.
The live one was deliberate. The idea was that the previous behavior was not good, and people wanted to move towards this direction, but it never happened.
Because it's every time I watch a Solidity Traps presentation, that's always one of the things they present in there.
Yeah, I think again it's the question of consistency wins. The less mental load is there if less exceptional cases we have in the ISA, and return data copy is like a big exception.
So I sense disagreement on it, but I don't sense any That's very firm division on it, so I don't know if there's what consensus we should change it or not. So it's kind of a sticky question on that.
So I think Solidity was really in favor of making it non-terminating. Because right now they have to have like extra code to check the length.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of in the don't really care camp. But like, yeah, if we want to expose the return data buffer to users, it's much better to be consistent.
Yeah, I mean the risk we have, but I don't think it's an actual risk, because if the code still checks for the length, that code will still work. It just won't be optimal. But people using return data copy and calls in assembly, they will need to update assembly for the calls anyway. And at the same time, they could simplify the return data copy pieces. But if they don't simplify it, it should still work with the, if it's non-terminating.
Yeah, I think like in general, what happens is you end up needing to do the check. So I think from a UX perspective, it's better to fail gracefully, because yeah, because I'm not sure that there's any savings, and then people have to add this check, and then the code gets more bloated, I guess. But that's all I really wanted to say on it. I mean, to bring it up for discussion again, if it's not too late to change it, we can reconsider it.
Feels a bit like it's probably too late if Solidity's on it, but we can discuss it again next week with Solidity. The friction is not necessarily the best, but the gas
Sorry, I think
golfing I think
Solidity
is where
and
it's going to win.
Viper are actually in agreement. Solidity is also in favor of the zero padding version.
Okay, so what's the outcome? I was reading specs. We're going to change it.
I think the only when we all spoke on about return data copy in the previous discussions, and when Solidity's been on call, basically the conclusion has been the zero padding version is preferable, but to be conservative, but the current option was chosen because it's conservative and doesn't change any semantics.
So Solidity and Viper want the zero padded version.
I would say so.
Okay, I don't think there's any tests written for this yet, so this is probably the last chance we have to change it. I'll post the proposal to change it to zero padded on EVM along with the other decisions and not decisions we made. Okay. All right. That's all. See everyone next week.
Thanks, everybody.
See you. Bye-bye.
Just
Oh.
one last thing, if I may say. So do we want to keep the 1600 time? Because in that case, I might have to change the protocol calendar.
1500 the current time?
1600, the current time, yes.
Oh,
Because in the United States, yeah, DST.
yeah, non-metric daylight savings time is going to cause problems. Which means it's going to be an hour later.
Earlier for United
Earlier?
States. It is an hour later. Yeah, I just remember. You are right.
Let's keep the UTC time. I think that's what all core devs does, and let's stick with
Yeah.
UTC time.
Okay. In that case, I will change it for people in United States. I mean, like protocol calendar, and we'll keep it at 1600 UTC.
Yeah, sounds good.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Right.